December 3, 1945. Sugamo Prison, Tokyo. Admiral Tuakihara's hand moved steadily across the paper, writing words that would have gotten him killed just months earlier. This former commander of Cruiser Division 5, a veteran of 7 major naval battles, was writing down a truth he'd suspected ever since he saw the carnage at the Philippine Sea. The Americans replaced their losses faster than we could count our victories. It was like fighting the ocean itself. No matter how much water you push away, more just keeps coming. Outside his cell, the ruins of Tokyo stretched for miles. That once mighty capital was reduced to ash and rubble by B-29 superfortresses, planes that came in numbers the Japanese never could have imagined. In the harbor, American warships, bigger than anything Japan thought possible, sat at anchor. Their crews casually worked on these war machines, which used more steel than entire Japanese cities had. The interrogation rooms at Sugamo Prison had become confession booths. Japan's naval leaders were facing a reality they'd either ignored or been forbidden to admit. They'd taken on an industrial giant. America didn't just outproduce Japan by a little, it outproduced them by huge margins. The stories they told to the United States Strategic Bombing Survey weren't just about military defeat. They revealed the total fantasy of competing with America's industrial power. These sessions gave us the most complete admission of industrial inferiority in military history. Senior Japanese officers carefully wrote down how they'd led their nation into war with an enemy that could make more aircraft in a month than Japan could in a whole year. Let's go back to the pre-war delusion. Yamamoto's warnings from America, those were the roots of Japan's fatal mistake, stretching all the way to the 1920s. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who later planned the Pearl Harbor attack, spent 2 years at Harvard University from 1919 to 1921 and another 2 as a naval attaché in Washington. When he came back to Japan, he sounded the alarm, but no one listened. In a letter from January 1941 to Navy Minister Koshiro Aikawa, Yamamoto wrote, "Anyone who's seen Detroit's auto factories and Texas's oil fields knows Japan doesn't have the power to compete with America in a naval race." His take on America's industrial capacity turned out to be scarily accurate. Captain Minoru Genda, who helped plan Pearl Harbor, went on a military trip to the U.S. in 1940. In his report, he talked about visiting Boeing's Seattle plant, where B-17 flying fortresses rolled off the assembly lines. That factory used mass production techniques Japan couldn't copy. Mitsubishi needed 3 weeks to build a twin-engine bomber. American factories did it in days. Here's the thing about the numbers no one paid attention to. A Mitsubishi delegation visited Douglas Aircraft in California and counted 6,000 workers on one shift, building DC-3 transports that would become C-47 military cargo planes. Japan's entire aircraft industry had just 35,000 workers across all companies. That one American factory employed nearly 20% of Japan's total aircraft workforce. But the Imperial General Headquarters brushed these warnings aside. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, told Emperor Hirohito in September 1941, "American workers are soft and undisciplined. Their factories make quantity, not quality. Japanese spirit and better training will beat any material disadvantage." But post-war, interrogations showed Japan's top leaders had accurate data on America's capacity. They just chose to ignore it. In 1941, the U.S. produced 19.4 million tons of steel every year. Japan made 5.8 million tons. America refined 4.3 million barrels of oil daily. Japan had access to just 55,000 barrels a day, mostly from conquered lands. Now let's talk about Pearl Harbor's hidden message, a tactical win that revealed a strategic defeat. December 7, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed to prove Japan right. 8 battleships damaged or sunk, 188 aircraft destroyed, 2,403 Americans killed. In 90 minutes, the Imperial Japanese Navy seemed to cripple America's Pacific naval power. But Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, who led the strike force, knew something was off. In post-war interrogations, he said his first thought was, "We only found old battleships, no carriers. And what's worse, the oil tanks are untouched, the submarine base is fine, and the repair yards are still working." Commander Minoru Genda flew over Pearl Harbor as an observer and saw something that chilled him. Later, he told American interrogators, "The harbor had more auxiliary ships, tenders, oilers, cargo ships, than the entire Japanese Navy had. These weren't warships, just support vessels. But they outnumbered our battle fleet." The Pearl Harbor attack force left thinking they'd hit America's main Pacific naval base. But Pearl Harbor was just one of dozens. San Diego, Bremerton, Mare Island, Hunters Point. Each of these bases was as big as or bigger than Japan's main naval facility at Yokosuka. The Battle of Coral Sea in May 1942 showed just how tough America's industrial machine was. The USS Yorktown was badly damaged by Japanese bombs and limped back to Pearl Harbor. Japanese intelligence thought repairs would take 3 to 6 months, based on their own capabilities. But naval records show the Yorktown entered dry dock on May 27. 1,400 workers swarmed the ship, working around the clock. Portable power plants provided electricity, welding arcs lit up the harbor like daylight, and pre-cut steel plates were ready to go. In just 72 hours, the Yorktown was combat-ready, sailing for Midway on May 30th. Compare that to Japan's carrier Shokaku, damaged at Coral Sea. It needed 11 weeks of repairs at Yokosuka. Post-war analysis laid bare the difference. American shipyards used pneumatic tools, electric welders, and unlimited steel. Japanese yards relied on manual labor and make-do materials. Midway was where the numbers became impossible to ignore. June 4, 1942. Japan lost 4 irreplaceable fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. But the real defeat wasn't the ships themselves. It was how fast each side could replace what they'd lost. Admiral Mato Magaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, wrote in his diary on June 10, "The Americans will replace their losses in a year. We can't replace ours in 10. He was actually being too optimistic. America was already building Essex-class carriers. The first one was commissioned in December 1942. By the end of the war, America had built 17 Essex-class carriers alone, plus 9 Independence-class light carriers. Japan built just 3 more fleet carriers during the entire war. The gap in aircraft was just as bad. At Midway, Japan lost 248 planes and 110 veteran pilots they couldn't replace. America lost 150 aircraft and 60 crew members. Within 6 weeks, American carrier air groups were back to full strength with new planes and trained pilots. Japan never fully recovered from those Midway losses. Now the Guadalcanal campaign, from August 1942 to February 1943, was a terrible example of how logistics wins wars. Japan and America fought 7 major naval battles there. The losses looked roughly equal. America lost 29 ships, Japan lost 38. But what happened after tells the real story. According to U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interrogations, within 6 months of Guadalcanal ending, America showed up with a fleet bigger than all the ships they'd lost. Japan struggled just to replace their destroyers. The Tokyo Express, Japanese destroyers running supplies to Guadalcanal, revealed the logistical mismatch. Those destroyers burned precious fuel to deliver 240 tons of supplies per run, and it was extremely risky. American Liberty ships, built at a rate of 3 a day, carried 10,000 tons per voyage. One American cargo ship held more than 40 Japanese destroyer runs worth of supplies. Japanese records show their troops on Guadalcanal suffered from severe malnutrition. By December 1942, only 30% were combat effective. American forces, meanwhile, complained about boring rations while eating 4,700 calories a day. By early 1943, Japanese naval intelligence had the real numbers on American production. The reports were so demoralizing they were classified above top secret. Captured post-war documents show these monthly production figures for March 1943. Aircraft: USA 7200, Japan 650.
Aircraft engines, USA 18,000, Japan 1,2 cents.
Pilots trained: USA 12,000, Japan 300. Warships launched: USA 48, Japan 3. Merchant ships: USA 140, Japan 8. Submarines: USA 8, Japan 2. Rear Admiral Sakichi Takagi reportedly told his colleagues after reading these, "If these numbers are even half true, we're already defeated." Spoiler: the numbers were conservative. America's production was growing faster than Japan could grasp. The Willow Run plant alone made 650 B-24 bombers a month. Japan's entire heavy bomber production during the war was just 15 aircraft. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, known as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, showed what happens when technology, training, and production come together. Japan scraped together 9 carriers with 473 aircraft. America brought 15 carriers with 956 aircraft. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who led the Japanese fleet, told interrogators, "Our pilots had less than 200 hours of training. We found out American pilots had at least 600 hours. We had no fuel for training, they trained non-stop." The tech gap was just as brutal. American carriers launched F-6F Hellcats with 2,000 horsepower engines, 6.50 caliber machine guns, self-sealing fuel tanks, and armor plating. Japan's Zeros were almost the same as they'd been in 1940, no armor, no self-sealing tanks, and still powered by 950 horsepower engines. The results were inevitable. Japan lost 476 aircraft and 3 carriers.
America lost 130 aircraft and no ship.
Japan lost 480 air crew, 8 months of pilot training gone. America lost 76 crew members and replaced them in days, thanks to programs churning out 3,000 naval aviators a month. Now, let's talk about the B-29s. November 1944. The first B-29 superfortresses appeared over Tokyo, flying from Saipan. Each bomber cost $639,000, more than most Japanese government buildings. America built 3,970 of them. The entire B-29 program cost $3 billion, more than Japan's entire annual military budget. Each superfortress had 55,000 parts made to precise standards Japan couldn't even measure. Pressurized cabins, remotely controlled gun turrets, bombing computers. This was tech Japan couldn't replicate even with a decade of work. The B-29 raids showed America's industrial excess was beyond Japan's understanding. These bombers flew 1,500 miles from the Marianas, dropped their bombs, and flew back, a 3,000-mile round trip using 6,000 gallons of fuel per plane. A 500-plane raid burned 3 million gallons of fuel. That's Japan's entire monthly aviation fuel production. The March 9 to 10, 1945 raid on Tokyo dropped 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs, destroying 16 square miles of the city. That one raid dropped more bombs than the entire Japanese Air Force had in stock. The invasion of Okinawa in April 1945 showed American industrial might at its peak. The invasion fleet had 1,457 ships, more than the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever operated. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who created the Kamikaze Corps, testified before he committed suicide, "I counted over 100 destroyers just in the screening force. We have 11 destroyers left in the entire Navy."
The kamikaze campaign proved courage can't beat industrial output.
Japan launched 1,900 kamikaze attacks at Okinawa, sinking 36 ships and damaging 368. But within 60 days, every lost ship was replaced, and most damaged ones were repaired. The supply operation for Okinawa was mind-blowing for Japan. Every day, transport ships delivered 50,000 tons of supplies: food, ammo, fuel, medicine. Japan's merchant marine couldn't move 50,000 tons a week to all their forces combined. American submarines were another statistical nightmare for Japan. From 1944 to 1945, they systematically took out Japanese merchant shipping. America built 228 submarines during the war. Japan built 126. But here's the key: America made submarines on assembly lines, while Japan built each one by hand. By January 1945, American subs had sunk 60% of Japan's merchant fleet, 4.8 million tons. Japan's entire shipbuilding industry could only produce 500,000 tons a year. America's Liberty ship program alone made 500,000 tons a month. The tech gap in subs was impossible to overcome. American subs had air conditioning, cold storage for food, ice cream machines, even washing machines. Japanese subs were 120 degrees inside. Crews survived on rice and pickled vegetables, getting scurvy and beriberi from malnutrition. August 1945. Emperor Hirohito's surrender speech ended the war, but the story of industrial disparity kept coming out in occupation interrogations. Japanese officers, free from wartime censorship, told the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey the real numbers. Admiral Somu Toyoda, the last commander of the combined fleet, testified in November 1945, the United States had plenty of raw materials, abundant resources, and massive production capacity. Japan's annual steel supply was 6 million tons. America made 80 to 100 million tons. Let's look at the final production stats. Military aircraft: USA 324,750, Japan 76,320. Tanks: USA 88,410, Japan 2,515. Military trucks: USA 2,382,311, Japan 165,945. Aircraft carriers: USA 141, Japan 17. Battleships: USA 10, Japan 2. Cruisers: USA 48, Japan 6. Destroyers: USA 349, Japan 63. Submarines: USA 228, Japan 126. Yamamoto's pre-war words were prophetic. He was killed in April 1943, shot down by American P-38s after his codes were broken. But his letters, stored in naval archives, told the truth. In a September 1941 letter to Navy Minister Oikawa, Yamamoto wrote, "If war breaks out between Japan and America, taking Guam, the Philippines, even Hawaii and San Francisco won't be enough. We'd have to march into Washington and dictate peace in the White House." I wonder if our politicians have the confidence to see this through and make the necessary sacrifices. His most accurate prediction came in a letter to fellow Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue. "In the first 6 months to a year of war against the US and Britain, I'll run wild and win victory after victory. But after that, I have no confidence at all." Japanese technical officers really understood the gap. Their engineering backgrounds let them grasp America's capabilities. During U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interrogations, naval constructors said American welding techniques were 5 years ahead of Japan's. Americans welded entire ship sections in factories, then put them together like puzzles. Japan still riveted each plate one by one. One American shipyard worker did the work of 10 Japanese workers. The quality difference was just as stark. When they looked at captured American equipment, every part was machined to precise standards, interchangeable between aircraft. Japan fitted parts by hand. America mass-produced better quality than Japan could craft individually. August 30th, 1945. General MacArthur landed at Atsugi Airfield to start the occupation. In the first weeks, Japanese officers saw overwhelming proof of America's industrial supremacy. The occupation fleet in Tokyo Bay had hundreds of warships, more naval power than Japan ever had. And this wasn't even America's entire fleet, just the part that was convenient to send. Within weeks, Americans were running telephone networks, postal systems, radio stations, and transportation that were better than anything Japan had built in decades. They repaired war damage faster than Japan had built the original infrastructure. The occupation food distribution showed America's agricultural dominance too. Through Garioa, government and relief in occupied areas, America provided $1.7 billion in aid. 59% of that was food and agricultural supplies, totaling $1.19 billion. One Liberty ship carried 10,000 tons of wheat, enough to feed a Japanese city for months. Hundreds of these ships arrived, feeding Japan's entire nation like it was just a logistical exercise, while America's own people had no shortages. Japanese agricultural experts looked at American data and found one American farmer produced enough food for 27 people. One Japanese farmer could barely feed his own family. America's agricultural surplus alone could sustain Japan's entire population. Oil was another impossible gap. Japanese naval officers always knew oil was their weak spot, but the occupation revealed it was worse than they feared. Japan invaded the Dutch East Indies to get 5 million tons of oil a year. America produced that amount every 4 days. Japan's best year ever produced 2.7 million barrels of oil total. America produced 1.7 billion barrels a year, 60% of global production. The ratio was 151 to 1 in America's favor. That one number explains the whole war. The electronics gap was just as insurmountable. By 1945, every American ship had multiple radar systems: search radar, fire control radar, navigation radar. Japan's best ships had one faulty search radar. The proximity fuse showed how sophisticated America's industry was. Each anti-aircraft shell had a tiny radar that exploded near aircraft, making it 5 to 10 times more deadly. Japan couldn't even make basic vacuum tubes reliably. America mass-produced 22 million proximity fuses, tiny radar systems used as ammunition. MIT's radiation laboratory had 4,000 employees and spent $1.5 billion developing over 100 radar systems. By August 1943, Japan's Naval Electrical Research Team had just 300 staff. Beyond materials, America's human capital advantage was decisive. America trained 250,000 pilots during the war. Japan trained 45,000. Japanese pilot training hours dropped drastically, 600 to 700 hours for elite pilots in 1941, 275 hours for Navy pilots and 130 for Army in 1943, 40 hours for Navy in 1944, and 60 to 70 hours for Army in 1945. Meanwhile, American training hours kept going up, reaching an average of 525+ hours by 1944. Americans burned more fuel in training flights than Japan allocated for combat operations. Japanese naval architects visited American shipyards after the war and saw industrial capacity they couldn't believe. Kaiser's Richmond shipyards employed 100,000 workers at peak production, more than Japan's entire shipbuilding workforce.
Kaiser's 7 shipyard built
1,490 vessels, 27% of all ships commissioned during the war. The Richmond yards averaged one Liberty ship every 42 days, with a record-setting ship, the SS Robert E. Peary, built in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. The most telling words came from Japan's senior officers during U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey interrogations. Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who was Navy Minister during the war, testified, "We knew the numbers, but we thought Yamato's spirit could overcome material disadvantage. One Japanese soldier might be worth 3 Americans in spirit, but one American factory was worth 50 Japanese factories in production." General Yoshijiro Yumizu, Army Chief of Staff who signed the surrender, said before his death in Sugamo Prison, "We fought the last war with the last war's thinking. We brought swords to a factory fight." Post-war analysis showed Japan's war effort was economically impossible. America's total war spending was $341 billion. Japan's entire GDP in 1941 was about $7 billion. America spent more on the Manhattan Project, $2 billion, than Japan's entire government budget for 1943. The financial gap was total. America funded the war through voluntarily bought bonds. Japan printed money, causing 300% inflation. When you add up all the production numbers, Japan never stood a chance. Cumulative military aircraft, USA 324,750, Japan 76,320, a 4.3 to 1 ratio. Aircraft carriers, USA 141, Japan 17, 8.3 to 1. Submarines, USA 228, Japan 126, 1.8 to 1. Destroyers, USA 349, Japan 63, 5.5 to 1. Merchant ship tonnage, USA 33,932,330 tons, Japan 4,152,361 tons, 8.2 to 1. Oil production, USA 833 million tons, Japan 5.5 million tons, 151 to 1. Steel production, USA 334 million tons, Japan 24 million tons, 14 to 1. Aluminum, USA 2.88 million tons, Japan 375,000 tons, 7.5 to 1. Here's the epilogue, from defeat to economic miracle. The Japanese officers who talked about America's industrial supremacy ended up being unexpected architects of Japan's post-war success. What they learned about American production methods in defeat became blueprints for peaceful prosperity. W. Edwards Deming arrived in 1950 to teach quality control to Japanese industry. His seminars, attended by Japan's top executives, passed on the industrial knowledge that fueled Japan's transformation. Companies started by former military personnel used American mass production techniques for consumer goods. By 1960, Japan was making cars that competed with American ones. By 1970, Japanese electronics dominated world markets. By 1980, Japan had achieved through industry what it failed to get through conquest: global influence and respect. The testimony of Japan's military officers about America's industrial supremacy is history's most complete admission of miscalculation. They discovered modern war isn't about courage, it's about capacity. Not about spirit, it's about statistics. Not about warriors, it's about workers. 10 times the industrial capacity. Those 4 words sum up why the Pacific War's outcome was inevitable. They never had a chance. But by understanding why, they helped build a better world. One where production serves peace, industry serves humanity, and former enemies become partners in prosperity.